Hi, guys.
All right. Let's get this thing shared and we'll get started.
All right.
Give that moment for our radio peoples. Yeah, nobody's watching now anyway.
Hey, there's some folks.
Oh, there we go. There's some people.
Look at that.
People checking in.
They're mad. Look at that. They got mad faces.
No, that's the eye that's watching us. Oh, somebody is mad.
Sorry, you're mad.
That's got to be Daniel. Don't be mad, Daniel. Yep, Daniel's mad. Why are you mad, Daniel? I can't share from here. Anyway, hey, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the episode here of Walking with God. I'm sorry for the laugh, but our Facebook feed is already being blown up by people. There we go. Smile. It is Tuesday, August 15th, and I threatened you, I warned you, I told you this was going to happen, and you didn't believe me, but Joe's back.
What's going on, everybody? How we doing?
All right, so Joe is back. We're not going to spend too much time going over the housekeeping. We did that last week. Welcome to everyone listening on the iHeartRadio, if you're tuning in that way, and then, of course, all of our wonderful Facebook followers who are still blowing up the chat screen with smiley faces, hearts, and all the other love, and now mad faces again. Oh, goodness. All right, let's dive right in. We've got the phone number right here. The phones are hot. Phones are open. 980-202-2915. Joe is in the house today, and we're just going to dive right in.
Let's go, buddy.
All right, so this is Joe Clausen. He is the Next Steps pastor for Westside Family Church in Lenexa, Kansas.
I am not the Next Steps pastor.
You're not?
I am the director of men's ministry at Westside Family Church.
Where did I get Next Steps pastor?
I work on that team.
There it is. Jeez. We're off to a great start this week. Sorry, everyone. All right, so Joe, last week we talked about calling. Calling, leading into this week. And so calling leads us to faith, and it leads us to obedience, and it leads us to endurance. But let's go back to calling. Again, I talked about that last week, and I went over mine. I want you to talk about yours this week. So give us your piece on calling.
Yeah. We talked last week, and when you introduced me the first time, we talked about my job at Westside.
When I did it correctly?
When you did it correctly. It's great.
That's not this time.
But the thing that you didn't talk about, and it's fine that you didn't because it's not something that everybody knows, is that I do work two jobs. And since 1999, I've had the privilege of working with adults and children with developmental disabilities.
Right.
Many of whom who have come out of just horrible abuse situations. And when I started at my first agency that I worked for, I truthfully went there not knowing what they did, but quickly fell in love with it. And part of the reason I fell in love with it was because when I was young, I had a second cousin who just went through some miserable stuff.
Right.
And I always felt really bad for him, but the part that ripped at my soul was that I just kept hearing how no matter where he went, he found himself in a bad spot. He found himself surrounded by people who didn't treat him so well. And as I went through high school, it was my guts. I don't ever want that to happen to anyone else. So as I started at my first not-for-profit job, it became real apparent. I get to be someone in the lives of these children where they can look and say, okay, when Joe's here, I'm safe.
Right.
When Joe's here, I'm cared for. When Joe's here, I'm loved. And there's been some good days. There's been some really bad days.
Right.
But through it all, the calling hasn't changed. So to look at the calling, yeah, I have the stuff at church and I love it. And it's where I spend the majority of my energy. But I could never see myself completely stepping away from this idea of fighting against the mistreatment of people who can't protect themselves.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Sorry, as I'm still trying to fight with the computer here. So that's all right. We've got your calling. Now, when we spoke, you and I talked after the show last week.
Yes, we did.
Okay, and so I started everything off with calling, but calling isn't exactly the first mile of the race. If everyone remembers last week, I kind of equated all this to running a 5K, with your first mile being calling, and your second mile being faith, and then your third mile being obedience, and then in order to run any sort of race, you have to have endurance. And I started with calling, but calling may not actually be the correct first step. So as we do on this show, let's go to Scripture. Mm-hmm. What is our order of operations? What does Scripture say?
Okay, so where I want to go with this, not where I want to start, Kyle, is that for all of us, we're going to catch glimpses of our calling at different points in time.
Okay.
You know, I remember when I got to high school, there was a kindergarten teacher that would stop and she would say, "I remember when you were in kindergarten, and this is what I thought you would do." And she'd write the graduating seniors a letter, the kids that she had when they were kindergartners. And it was amazing how many of those folks, even at a young age, she could see that there was something special, and they would end up going into the field or the field of study that she had seen from them when they were young. So we can see our calling, this thing that grabs at our heart at any point in time. Where I want to go with this evening isn't necessarily saying that there's a distinct spot that calling fits in with this,
Okay.
but to look at this faith and obedience and endurance and say all of these things are going to help us chase out our calling in a much more profound way.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does.
Because I know people who've known their calling since they were little, but then I also know people like our buddy Lefty.
Right, Lefty.
Hey, Lefty, if you're watching, and not Phil Mickelson.
No, not Phil Mickelson.
Who still right now is chasing out what his calling is, but he's chasing it out after a point of coming to faith and being obedient, and he's starting to see glimpses of where he feels that Jesus has for him to be. So I do want to. There is a cycle. There is an order of those other three things, but calling can slide in anywhere.
Okay.
So, but it does start with faith. You know, we can't begin to wrestle biblically through the idea of endurance without beginning at faith. You know, Romans 16:26. Romans is written, you know, and it's written it's Paul's, in my opinion, it's Paul's greatest letter.
Right.
And to the church in Rome, and he ends this by saying, "I'm doing this so that all might come to obedience that comes from faith." And so what he's basically saying is, I want obedience to begin to happen, not because it's a dictated rule, which is what they dealt with in the Old Testament, and which a lot of people would consider is who Jesus is this dictator.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he doesn't want that. He wants it to come from a place of faith, where it's faith and it's love, and that feeds into we want to be obedient because we have faith in where we're going.
Okay.
So faith does lead into obedience. And then if you look even further than that, and this is where you're not going to get the Revised Joe version, to move from obedience to obedience to endurance, and then begin to see that cycle goes all the way back to faith again, and how they all play together. In Hebrews 12:1 and 2, it says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles." That's the obedience part.
Okay.
"And let us run with perseverance," or endurance, "the race that is marked for us." There's that endurance. "While keeping our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of everything." It goes back to that faith. And you see there's this cycle that begins to happen that allows us to be able to look and say, I'm going to run this race in the way that's prescribed for me, the way that my trainer sets out, so that I have faith that I can reach my ultimate goal. You know, and this plays into a lot of things. I look back, you know, I told you I started at a not-for-profit, and I remember I worked with this young man. His name was Richard, and I had the privilege of working with Richard and working for Richard for 6 years. You know, I didn't take care of him. I worked for him. And in that time, on day 2, Richard hit me in the head with a rock.
And that has to hurt.
It does not feel good.
No.
It does not feel good. And I don't know why, but at that point in time, I felt like I was at home. but there was this thing about this young man, Richard, where I remember thinking, I have enough faith in Richard's fight, because I got to experience it, that he can fight his way through these demons that are coming from his past. Well, I didn't know how we were going to do this together. I had no clue how we were going to do this together. But what I knew was that there were also people who had walked this road in front of me and had a lot of experience, who said, if you follow this order of operations, you're going to be able to help Richard through what he's going through.
Okay.
And so I followed those things, and it began to lead to moments of victory. where Richard would, instead of hitting me with something or biting me or spitting on me every day, we'd go a couple of days, and then we'd go a week, and then we went like a month. And I remember the day when we hit a month, and it was just one of the coolest things where I was like, hey, I haven't been punched in a month. This is incredible.
That's
or at least
good.
not by this guy.
Right. Others maybe.
Others maybe. But as I saw the fruits of my faith that Richard could move through things, then what came from that is I became and saw the fruits of the obedience to the path that was laid out by the people who had trained me. It created endurance so that 6 years later I can honestly say that when Richard graduated into adulthood, this was not the same young man that would hit me with rocks and sticks and bite me and do all sorts of craziness. He was not that young man anymore. Now, there were a lot of people that played in that.
Sure.
But I had like I said, I had the privilege of working for Richard for 6 years. And just doing this whole journey with him was just an amazing time, and seeing the fruit of that led to that. Because of that endurance, I was able to chase that calling out even more.
Right.
You know, and I believe that that's the same thing that happens with Jesus. You know, we have to look. Jesus is our teacher. He's our trainer, so to speak, with your race analogy, which I love. You know, obviously Kyle runs 5Ks. I eat 5,000 nachos. This is how this works. But
nachos sound really good.
Nachos do sound really good right now.
We're going out for nachos, anyone?
But in our lives, we run into things, whether it be whether our calling is. And by the way, last week, some amazing things I heard. I loved hearing people talk about how they volunteer at animal shelters and work with those animals that have been forgotten. I love hearing people talk about the juvenile diabetes and some of these other things or veteran stuff. Go Team Fidelis. Shout out to Team Fidelis. It happens every time I'm on your show.
That's right.
And
I'll make fun of Daniel later. Or maybe I just did.
And it was amazing to hear. But all of those battles are battles that are going to continue for a very long time. The people who are chasing out loving the animals. There's never going to be a shortage of animals to love.
Correct. Maybe
juvenile diabetes will be cured. That would be incredible.
Wouldn't it though?
That would be incredible. I'd jump up and down with you. We'd go out. We'd have nachos. But for most of us, the thing that is our calling is something that we're going to be in for the long term. And so we have to have this endurance. We have to have the right training. We have to have the right trainer.
The right trainer.
And so as we move forward in those things, it's just an incredible, it's incredible the invitation that we've been given from Jesus.
Yep. Okay, so that's going to segue well. You know, we've run our race, and every runner knows, you know, if you've run again a 5K to a marathon to an ultra marathon, every runner knows that no race is perfect. All right, your endurance can always be better. And again, we're speaking totally running analogy at this point. Your endurance can always be better. So through calling, faith, and obedience, what can we expect to see in our endurance? And I know that you actually came with a wonderful endurance story.
I do.
Yeah,
I do.
Go ahead and fire this one out. This is good stuff.
I've read about this guy. His name is Pete Kostelnik.
Kostelnik. That's just fun to say.
Yeah, isn't it? And Pete Kostelnik is probably one of the greatest endurance athletes that the world has ever seen. He holds the current record for running across the continental United States.
Across the entire
From coast to coast. I can't even begin to imagine what it would feel like to start at the shore in California and then see the Rocky Mountains. I can't wrap my mind around this.
Well, we're from Kansas. We don't do mountains.
We don't do mountains. We have hills.
Yes.
And not many of them. And so it's just...
Speaking of crazy marathon runners and ultra marathon runners, we are being joined by Josh, just logged in. What's up, Josh?
Hey, Josh, looking forward to your show on September the 5th.
3 weeks.
That's going to be awesome. But so Pete would run these races, and he is a multi-time winner of something called the Badwater Ultra Marathon, which is, okay, catch this. It's a 146-mile race across Death Valley, California.
Where it gets a little warmly.
Today. In Badwater, California, the high temperature was 119. Catch this, the low temperature was 96.
Oh, that's a cool night.
It's a cool night in Badwater, California.
Ooh.
And so in Badwater, when they would run this, they start at an elevation of 279 feet below sea level. Below sea level. And
Okay.
they end at an elevation of 8,360 feet above sea level.
That's up that way.
146 miles.
But there's a catch to this 146
There's
miles,
a
isn't
catch.
there? Yeah.
There's actually a couple of catches. The big catch is, if you look at this, where they start and where they end on a map, it's only 5 miles difference as the crow flies.
As the crow flies. We're Midwesterners.
Welcome to Kansas,
That's
folks.
right.
As the crow flies, it's only a 5-mile race. But with the way the terrain is and the way they have to do things, this turns into a 146-mile race.
Mm-hmm.
This is the craziest thing I've ever heard of. There are moments where you have to run on the yellow paint, or your shoes will melt to the pavement.
Yep.
I can't even begin to wrap my mind around this and how you do this. And through reading with Pete, reading things that Pete said, one of the things he brought up, he said, is it's not just physical endurance. He says it's mental endurance.
Mm-hmm.
Because as you're running, people are dropping out.
Right.
People are dropping out. Less than 2% of the people who start this race actually finish this race on a yearly basis. Because they're given a 36-hour window to finish this thing in.
Right.
You know, and he's the record holder. He did this in 21 hours. Which I can't even begin to wrap my mind around doing anything for 21 straight hours, except maybe sleep.
Or eating nachos.
Eating nachos, yes.
Yeah.
So, but he talks about the mental and physical endurance. And for some of us, as we wrestle through calling,
Mm-hmm.
it's not just the physical endurance part that comes up. Honestly, for a lot of us, it's not the physical endurance part that comes up. We can physically do the things that we've been called to do.
Correct.
Not many of us is our calling climb Mount Everest.
Nope.
But for a lot of us, mentally and emotionally, our calling can feel like climbing Mount Everest.
It really can. Yep.
Because we'll hit moments where we feel like we've made progress, and we haven't. You know, and that's where Jesus comes in.
Mm-hmm.
And this is another one of those times where I'm not going to give you the Revised Joe version.
Ah!
But it's okay. Speaking of that, Kyle did a great job with the Revised Kyle version last week. I was impressed.
I owe him a quarter because I absolutely took his gimmick. That's gimmick infringement, and that ain't right.
It's okay. But Matthew 11:28 through 30, it says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest.
Mm-hmm.
Come to me and learn from me. Let me teach you. For my burden is light and my yoke is easy." The thing of it is for those of us who follow Jesus, that's not an offer, that's a command. There's a period at the end of that sentence.
Yep.
So it's a statement. And I believe firmly that if we're following Jesus, we are to run to him anytime when it gets emotionally too heavy for us.
Mm-hmm.
When it gets potentially physically too heavy for us, we are to run directly at him. But here's where I want to land, and then I've got one more little story to tell.
Sure.
Guys, if you don't have that relationship with Jesus, here's the cool part about those verses. It's him saying, "Come on, come to me, sit in my lap. Let me provide some shade in the middle of your race." He's not going to run the race for you, but he's going to provide you shade in the middle of it.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to provide you rest. He's going to provide you moments of reprieve that we all need. And the offer is on the table if we choose to say, I want Jesus to be the trainer that's going to get me ready for this race that I have in front of us. Whether that race is a cause, overcoming an addiction, healing from a divorce. Man, goodness gracious, guys. Healing is some of the hardest things in the world. I was at Lansing Correctional Facility, not as an inmate, but just as a guest. And
Yep.
I had a guy who came up to me and he told me that while he was there, he had been stabbed 17 times.
Oh my goodness.
But he said the initial stab was not the worst.
Right.
It was the healing from it, because what was created together had been severed. And so for things to reform back into wholeness, he said that hurt worse than any stab he ever received.
Right.
So guys, if you're healing from something, this is a show for folks who are going through divorce. If you're healing from divorce, that hurts. That can't be easy.
Nope.
I haven't walked that road myself, but I've walked other hurts, and I know the healing part hurts. We have an offer from a trainer, if you accept it. And if you want to talk more about that, call us. We got 9 minutes left in the show.
Right here.
Check us out at that number.
That's right.
You could do the Twitter thing. I don't do a Twitter thing, but you could do the Twitter thing. You could do LinkedIn, Instagram. Kyle, tell them all the ways they could actually get in touch with us.
Well, there's several ways, Joe. I'm glad you mentioned that. Yes, you can tweet us. We are at WWG_WYTV7. And then, of course, our email is walkingwithgod, WYTV7 @gmail.com. That's all one word. And then, of course, Facebook is where you're watching us now. Now, Joe segued me perfect. We didn't even plan that. That worked out wonderfully. If you want the video of this show, if you want to see our smiling faces,
which you do,
just
look at us.
Of course you do.
Who wouldn't?
That's right. You can do it, of course, on Facebook where you are right now. You can also find us on YouTube, and then LinkedIn also has the video. Now, if you want to listen to the show, there are ways to do that. You can go to Spreaker.com. Like I told you last week, we're on iHeartRadio. Yay. And then I had a big surprise for this week. Is everyone ready for the surprise?
I think so.
As of an hour and a half before the start of this show, we are now available for download at iTunes.
Woohoo!
The #1 site for downloaded podcasting is iTunes, and now Walking with God is now available. So go to your podcast feature on iTunes. You can either search for Walking with God, or you can search for WYTV7, and you can subscribe to our podcast, and now you can take this show wherever you may roam, the audio version. But yeah, that was as of an hour and a half ago, so super exciting news. Just anything that we can do to spread the word of this show. And again, this show, Walking with God, we're on WYTV7. And due to everyone's support, WYTV7 is just blowing up. It's amazing. And so I want to make sure that I mention some of my other counterparts here. You can go subscribe to Revive All Radio with Miss Donna, and she is a lot of fun. There is Morning Cereal, which is for the millennials in the group. And then there is...
Which is not us.
Which is not us, but her show is entertaining, even though I can't relate to most of it because I'm old. There is Financial Confidence, God's Way. That is with Lynn. That is scripture-based financial help.
That's incredible.
Isn't it, though? I mean,
how many people need something like that? This fella.
Yeah, exactly.
Here.
So, yeah, Lynn is awesome. I got to kind of talk with her on Sunday on a video conference. I really like Lynn, and her show is really good. And then another one is Things That Are Sound Doctrine, and that is with Pastor Robert Golson. And I got to listen to him speak, and that dude's got God on speed dial. So yeah, now there's new ways to hear us. Don't forget about the iTunes. Please subscribe, and then of course on the Facebook page we'll put all the information for all the nonsense that I have just been spouting out to everyone. And then let's see here. What else do we have? Oh, Joe had kind of a cool story. I said we were going to throw this out there if we had extra time. We've still got 6 minutes left. So, Joe, you have kind of a more somber event coming up, but with a positive twist. Tell us real quick.
Yeah. One of the things that I occasionally get to do at my job at the church is I get to visit people in the hospital, and I get to talk with them, and sometimes some of their more difficult seasons.
Sure.
And I have a friend, and I don't use that word lightly. I have a friend. Her name is Beverly.
Okay.
Beverly's in her mid to late 80s. Spry young lady who has been battling cancer and truth of the matter is in the final stages of her life.
Sure. And
Beverly, we talk about endurance today.
Yes.
Beverly has taught me something about endurance that I just don't think that you can teach someone until you're walking through that time yourself. Beverly has done an amazing job of ending her life well.
Yes.
Kyle, you talked about it being that final kick.
This is the kick. Yeah, anyone who's run a race, you know that last 100 yards, when you lay your eyes on the finish line, you kick, you sprint, you run all out.
Beverly has, up to a couple of weeks ago, been going out with this organization that it was spawned through one of our church men's groups called God's Army, that goes around and helps people whose homes are in disrepair. Oftentimes they're veterans who have just hit really rough times and can't take care of their home themselves, and they'll go and they'll do all of this for nothing.
Right.
Well, Beverly, who couldn't do any of the physical labor, but realizing that even realizing that her life was nearing its conclusion, was going to these projects and just walking around and hugging people and reminding them of how much value they have and how much what they're doing is appreciated. And there was nothing better in this world than a Miss Beverly hug.
That's
she
right.
She would come
That's
and
right.
she would love you in a way that she didn't even have to know you to know, and for you to realize that she loved you, and that she wanted nothing more than for you to know how valued you are and how valued you are to Jesus. And it's just incredible to watch her end her life, end her race, this race that's been put out in front of her, with such an amazing kick. And I look at it and realize that I prayerfully have many, many years left, because we got a baby about to be here. So I prayerfully have many, 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 many years left. But I want to end my race the way my friend Beverly has ended her race.
That kick.
That kick.
That kick.
And so, guys, as we face these races and these challenges that are in front of us, don't forget that the goal here is to run your race in order to win.
That's right.
I like to tell people the only reason you compete is to win. And we're supposed to run like we're trying to win. And my friend Beverly is winning her race.
She is. She's almost to the finish line.
She's almost to the finish line, and she's winning.
Yep.
But to get to that trainer, to get to that point, she had the right trainer.
She did.
And so I just say it one more time. If you want to talk to somebody about that, give us a buzz.
That's right.
Check us out. Get in touch with Kyle during the week. He'll get you connected with me if you want to talk with me. He'll talk with you himself. He's amazing at that, guys. Don't let him try to pawn you off. You can talk with this guy. He'll tell you about great stuff. So
sports.
That and Jesus. So Kyle, thanks for letting me tell my story about Miss Beverly.
Absolutely. We kind of went out of order ourselves, talking about order of operations. We never opened with a prayer because I was just ready to get Joe on the horn with you here.
Yeah.
So real quick, like we said, in 3 weeks on September 5th, Josh, the masked veteran running across Iowa, will be here in the man cave with me. Joe is going to be back on September 19th.
Yes,
that is our third Tuesday of the month with Joe. And I'm excited. We talked before the show about what we wanted to do next time he's back. So here's just the real quick synopsis. Why and how do you read the Bible? Do we read the Bible? Why and how are we doing that?
The big question is why.
Why?
And we're going to start there. And we're going to land there for quite a little while.
That's right. So we're going to dive right into why and how you read the Bible the next time Joe is with us. And so that's it. That's our show, man. Thank you, Joe, very much.
Yeah, man.
You want to take us out in prayer?
I would love to.
Let's do it.
Jesus, I want to thank you for this time. It's been a pleasure chatting with you for the last 30 minutes. I just pray that as we spend time wrestling through this idea of endurance, that we realize that you are the ultimate trainer and you are the provider of that endurance, and that we can just run to you whenever we need, whenever we feel like we might need, that you are available and you're waiting. And so, Jesus, I thank you again. I thank you for this opportunity. I thank you for these wonderful folks who paid attention to Kyle and I for the last 30 minutes. And I pray that they, if nothing else, that they got to know you a little bit better today. So Jesus, I say I love you. I'll talk to you again soon. Amen.
Amen. Everyone have a great rest of your week. We're on a 6-day, 23.5-hour break. And then we'll be back next Tuesday with another episode of Walking with God on WYTV7.
Let's go eat some nachos.
Nachos. Later, everybody.